Welcome. I'm back. This is me, Cyrus King. In this segment, I'm going to talk a little bit about third-party candidates. I was going to have this as a podcast, but when have my podcast, I'm going to go a little bit deeper. I'm probably going to break down the Libertarian Party and the Green Party by themselves, two separate podcasts. So for the YouTube, I'll keep it a little simple. Um, where should I start? When you deal with American politics, as everyone knows, you're dealing with two dominant parties, and both parties, like, people don't really understand how politics work. So especially in the poorer communities, you would hear, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, right? And then you would hear, I'm a liberal. So Democrats are liberal, Republicans are conservatives. And I don't think people understand most Democrats are not liberals and most Republicans are not conservatives, right? That's no question. And you know that because take the Hillary Clinton versus Bernie Sanders, you know, primary that just happened with Democratic primary, right? Once Hillary won, all the people, the Democrats, the Democratic Party wanted Hillary to win anyway, so that's not even probably a good example. But even the people on the internet who were Bernie people, they switched and said, okay, we're going to go with Hillary now. And it's okay because, Donald Trump is not really the best option, but if you were a real progressive, if you were a real liberal, then if Hillary Clinton lost, if she won and Bernie lost, you go to Jill Stein, Dr. Jill Stein of the Green Party. This is if you're real. This is what I think sometimes people in poorer communities and less educated communities, and I mean in all communities of all colors, not just the inner city, but in the South, in the trailers, in the trailer parks, people basically it has nothing to do with race. It has to do with how politically astute you are, what's your level of education. Most people confuse the two. You're a Democrat, you're a Republican. That doesn't mean you're a liberal, that doesn't mean you're a conservative. So if Hillary Clinton won, she beat Bernie. If you're really progressive or liberal, you would vote for Jill Stein. Now, people would say when they hear that, they would say, well, no, because Donald Trump is he's the boogeyman. He's he's the evil that we have to stop from getting into office. But guess what? That mentality is basically how the Democrats and Republicans have basically kept power for 200 years. The Democrats and Republicans represent basically two ends of the same elite. It's just that one end, which is the Democratic wing, they might have more of their money tied in social services and charity, and they're gonna support growth of government. Maybe abortions, like parent planhood, and things like that, right? So they're gonna want bigger government, and because they want bigger government, they have to pretend to care about the people, primarily even in urban areas or immigrants, because with immigrants, if you give in their minds, if you are pro-immigrant, the new immigrants who come in will be more likely to vote for you. But honestly, does the Democrats really? You go to a Democratic convention, you could kind of tell they've been dealing with black folks for a while, so they could pretend a little better to maybe have some rappers, have some black entertainers. They kind of know black culture a little bit, not much, but a little bit. You go to Hispanic culture, they don't know Hispanic culture. Like you ask the average Democrat, the difference between a Puerto Rican, Mexican, Dominican, they wouldn't know. They don't know the difference. They don't know Hispanic culture, and let alone when you start getting to Native Americans and stuff like that. Like they basically understand. Like this, and then the Republicans on the other end, same. Do the Republicans really care about abortion? Republicans tend to be more controlled by energy companies, military, like weapons companies, and the banks support both parties. So I can't even say one is more banker than the other. Honestly, I can't even say that. Right? The banks support both parties equally, and because of that, the Republicans, though, it kind of intertwines with the church. So then they have to go into the whole evangelic and the whole Protestant and WASP, and they have to pretend to be Christian. But just like the Democrats, do the Democrats really care about minorities? Do they care about immigrants? Do they even care about gays? Probably not. Republicans, same end. Do they really care about Christian values? No, of course they don't. But both parties are part of the same elite. Like, and the problem that spiritual people have is that when spiritual people say this, people in the metaphysical community say this, they say it, oh, both parties are the same, so I don't got to vote, right? It's a kind of irresponsible mindset because, in a sense, what happens is you could tell spiritual people don't really know about politics. They don't know about economics. They don't really study the social trends that go on. They're too busy trying to escape the world. So what happens is that lack of ignorance, because remember, and this is what my problem with spiritual people has always been. If you're really spiritual, you're supposed to be the leaders. Like if you're practicing some advanced metaphysics and you're so deep, and everyone else in the so-called world is so behind you, you're supposed to be the leaders. You're supposed to be the example that people go to when they need direction in the world. That's just my thoughts on it. And you can tell from when people talk, they don't understand how politics is run. Because I could maybe talk from from the eyes of an African American, and I always say when a black person says I'm a Democrat, black people don't, or African Americans don't really realize that, okay, the Republicans got problems, right? The Republicans, yeah, it's a party that freed slaves, blah blah blah, but that's not the same Republican Party at this point. But if you ask the average black person or African American, even the average Hispanic, I can't speak for Native Americans and Asians, but I would even probably say Asian too, but I'm not sure about Asians, right? But the average black or Hispanic American or Latino American, if you ask them their values, they tend to be conservative. That's the funny part. Both would say, I know you have the Cubans in Miami who tend to be Republican, but even that's older. The young Cubans tend to be 50-50 now. But for the most part, you ask them their values, they're going to say, they're going to actually describe to you conservative values. That's the scary part. And then the problem is that once you understand that, so then they say, well, so then why they vote for Democrats? They vote for Democrats because when they think Republican, they think the extreme wing of the Republicans. The KKK, Tea Party, right or wrong, that's what they think, right? And so they end up voting for the Democrats when the Democrats and them almost have nothing in common. So it's kind of like me voting for my representative, and my representative has nothing in common with me, basically. Because even when you want to talk about, let's say African Americans, the South is really the center of African American culture. The majority of African Americans live in the South. The Republicans tend to cater to Southern culture. And again, I know the Southern culture, you're going to say, well, they cater to white Southern culture. But I'm giving an example of how people vote against themselves or their own interests, and then wonder why they're in a situation that they're wondering. So then you could flip it and go to white Republicans, right? Or let's say the white people on a lower economic totem pole. They would vote against things like universal health care. And again, I'm not for universal health care, right? So I'm not even, in fact, I'm not a Democrat. I consider myself a libertarian, so I'm independent. But if you had to put a gun to my head, I'll be closer to conservative. I'm a libertarian. But when you look at it and you say, well, most people in the South who need that health care, most people in the South who don't understand international politics, if international politics hit them in the head, yeah, they understand Israel and Arabs and Muslims, and they understand in their minds Muslims trying to kill them. But even that's a lie, because at the end of the day, the whole Muslim stuff is a bigger threat to Europe. Honestly, yes, we had 9/11, but if you look, the whole Muslim threat is a bigger threat to Europe, and especially when you talk about Israel. If America just pulled out of Israel, 50% of the Muslim stuff that we have going on right now would not even be taking place. But that never gets explained to people in the South. Or let's say the Republican base. I don't want to say the South, but let's say to the Republican base. Doesn't get explained to them. So in their minds, Republicans are going to, as Donald Trump says, make America great. Protect us from the Muslims. When, because they're not educated on core issues, they don't really realize that's what people like Ron Paul was saying. You pull back from Israel. First of all, Israel can take care of themselves. Israel is not like Israel. You could make the argument outside of Russia and China and America. And if you just break the European armies down to like the singular, like the French army, the British army, you don't look at them as NATO or EU. Israel is probably the fourth or fifth most powerful country just militarily in the world. They don't need help. And I don't say this as somebody anti-Israeli, anti-Jewish at all. No, I'm just keeping it real, looking at observing it from afar. But yet, the Republican base would be one of the things that's said to them. to get them to vote because they're fear of Muslims. So again, they vote. They need health care. They vote against health care. Yes, they kind of understand. They think they understand why they're against it, but are they really? Do they really understand why they're against it? Because for me, when I look at it, that's the problem most people have. When they get into the political process, it's more based on emotion. You would hear stories of Donald Trump kicking a baby out of a town hall meeting, right? He kicked the baby out. They highlight Donald Trump's most extreme behavior, his outrageous comments. But they won't talk about things like, oh, Donald Trump says if he was going at terrorists, he would kill civilians. He would kill their families. That sounds great, when you're saying it and you get people riled up. But think what that means. That's basically terrorism. What do terrorists do? Terrorists kill civilians. So you have a president, a would-be president of a country saying that I'm going to kill, basically the families of terrorists. That's basically you're doing terrorism. But no one really talks about that. They talk about the superficial stuff. They talk about him saying he wants to build a wall and make Mexico pay for it. Once you heard him say he's going to make Mexico pay for it, you knew that wasn't real. So now when that same Republican base is pissed that he's backtracking immigration, of course he's backtracking immigration. In the end of the day, that Republican base doesn't really realize America is only 67% white at this point, and that number is going to keep going down. As much as people talk about immigration from Latin America, you got a lot of immigration from Asia as well taking place. And the difference with the Asian immigration is they tend to be very educated. So you tend to have a lot of high-end immigrants in terms of education, and they could get high-end jobs, but they tend to, for the most part, that would be lower than the Latinos and blacks. Blacks might be like 80-20, maybe probably 90-10 Democrat to Republican. Latinos probably is 65-35. The Asians probably, if I had to guess off the top of my head, if I look up the numbers, probably 55-45. But even then, when you look at it, what the Democrats have done is they have kind of mastered building a coalition of, young women, African Americans, Latinos, Asians, Native Americans, people in the LGBT community, gay community. They built a coalition. So for the most part, even though that coalition may not work as well for state to state, like, Senate and Congress voting, when it comes to the presidential elections, it's extremely hard at this point for Republicans to win elections. Extremely hard. So, in a sense, yes, Republicans could talk all they want about making them, the base and making America great, but this is not the same country that you lived in 1975 and 1965. No matter what, you may hate it, but it's a multicultural country at this point. It is. And you're ignoring that. So when you go for Donald Trump and he wins the election, the Republican primary, but then he's struggling in the national election, of course he's going to struggle in the national election. At the end of the day, politics to me, and this is why a third party is needed, because if you really pay attention, the Republicans and Democrats, realistically, don't really disagree on the most important issues. They're all pro-Israel. For the most part, they're all pro-Saudi Arabia. The Republicans are probably more pro-Saudi Arabia, but, most of them are pro-Saudi Arabia, even though the Saudi Arabian people may not be, maybe, Saudi Arabian people are anti-American. It's funny how this goes. Both groups are anti-Iran, but the Iranian government is anti-American, but the Iranian people are pro-American, right? And then both sides like Saudi Arabia, and the Saudi Arabian government is pro-American, and the Saudi Arabian people is anti-American. Now, here's the problem. If we really concerned with terrorism for governments and people who are rich could fund it, but the people doing it's gonna be the poor. So when you look at it realistically, Saudi Arabia would be a bigger problem for terrorism than Iran would, but yet all you hear is Iran. And both parties agree to this. Both parties don't fight this. Both parties say, okay, Saudi Arabia is our chief ally. Both parties say we're 100% pro-Israel. We don't question anything Israel does. No matter if you want to pretend, both parties are not for universal health care. And again, this is one thing I agree with both parties with, actually. But the Democrats know they have to placate to the progressives, so they say, okay, we have Obamacare, which is not universal health care. I'm using this as an example to show how both parties are the same, right? Because on the core issues, because you have to understand, the reason why you think both parties are different is because The issues where they agree on are not important issues locally or domestically, but they're more important internationally. Both parties are pro-war. When it came time for the Iraq War, Afghan War, both parties voted for that. Honestly, right? So when you look at it very carefully, both parties are the same and they're different on the fundamental levels. Both parties don't want a third party in. You know, if the Democrats are really the party of the people, they'll say, oh, let's have a third party in. They can't really win anyway. Republicans, you kind of expect not to. But the Democrats, if they were as progressive as they say, right, which is open-minded, you would think they would say, okay, let's have a third party in. But no, they don't want a third party in. In fact, you can make the argument the Democrats are actually more anti-third party than Republican, because when you hear when you say the word libertarian, most people may not know what it is, but they've heard of it. The Libertarian Party is not as ostracized from the Republican circle as the Green Party is from the Democrats. You bring up the Green Party, Democrat, and again, I don't agree with the Green Party on a lot of issues, but I do admit their intentions are still good. At the end of the day, socialism doesn't work. I know people may not like it, but just looking at it long term, I mean, look what's going on in Latin America right now, Venezuela, Brazil. Socialism, even when you have countries like China, which are communists, they've integrated capitalism in their systems, and for the most part, you can see they're basically communists. Just they have the facade of communists, but they're really more socialist. Like, put it this: if socialism doesn't work, communism totally doesn't work. Communism is a totally different end. But here's the difference, though, and this is why I differ from the regular Republicans who. If you have any type of because no matter what, especially when you're a person of color, you're gonna study. I mean, especially if you're sincere, you're gonna study socialism. You're gonna study Marxism. That's no question. You're gonna, because those systems portray themselves as being about the people. So I give Denmark and certain Scandinavian countries this, and this is my biggest problem with the Republicans. The minute you say, like, if you say Bernie Sanders, they say he's a socialist pig. But they don't even say socialist. They say he's a communist pig, right? And all the internet trolls say this. And they mention China, Russia. And this is how you know they're not sincere. If they were sincere, why are you mentioning China and Russia? Mention Denmark. Mention Scandinavian countries. Guess what? A lot of people who are in the trailers right now, you show them Denmark, and you show them how they living. Guess what? They would say, I want to live in Denmark. They would say, I want free college. They would say, I want free healthcare. Now, I don't even agree with that, but I know the average person, if you really showed them socialist countries like that, they will say, I want that. But instead, when we say socialist, we say China and Russia. That's done on purpose. And that is not sincere. And that is not giving people a choice. And that's why that adds to the confusion of people not knowing the difference between socialism, communism, capitalism, Republicans, Democrats. It ends up being confusing. This is why most people say, you know what, I gave up all that stuff. I don't want to hear about none of it. That's why they say it, because it's done with an insincere intent. It's done to cause confusion, to cause chaos, and to not be sincere about what these systems really are about. And this is why I could say, okay, I don't agree with the Green Party and Jill Stein, but I respect Jill Stein. No, I'm actually not a fan of her politics, but I respect her politics. I'm actually, as a person, she seems like a pretty cool person. At the end of the day, if I'm going to vote, I'm going to vote for Gary Johnson of the Libertarian Party. But at the same time, it's important for people to understand these names, who Gary Johnson is, who Jill Stein is, who the Green Party is, who Libertarians is, because most people don't realize when you have presidential debates, it's not held by government agencies, it's held by private agencies. And they have this rule, ever since Ross Perot ran, that you have to have 15%, you have to poll 50% nationally to be included in the debates. I don't think Joe Stein's ever going to get 15%. I'm not going to lie. I think that's not going to happen. But Gary Johnson could. And once you get to the debates, that's a whole nother ball game. It's like, I know my parents. If I look at my parents and I say, oh, think if I mention Gary Johnson, Jill Stein, the Green Party, Libertarian Party, they won't know who the hell that is, what it is. But if Gary Johnson gets in the debates, people who normally would not know who these people are would know who these people are. And in the end of the day, that's what happens. Like, when you want change, you have to force the system to change. So if you're a member of the Democratic Party and you say, well, I'm tired of Democrats, they're liars, but I'm going to vote for them because I'm scared of Donald Trump. And guess what? Donald Trump and people like him are always going to be there. They're not going anywhere. Even if Hillary Clinton wins, I guarantee you this. If Hillary Clinton wins, it's going to be for one term. She's going to be done. Right? She's not Barack Obama. You could hate Barack Obama, and I'm not a fan, but I give him this. That guy knows how to play the game. There's no question about it. Like, the Republican Party still hasn't recovered from Barack Obama destroying them. In fact, you can make the argument that's why Donald Trump is even in the position he's in. He wouldn't be there if Barack Obama wasn't president. He came in and destroyed the Republican Party because, like I said, the Republican Party, at this stage in their existence, because their core base is not the brightest in the world, they push fear, they push ignorance. That's how they do it. There's no substance to them. There's absolutely no substance to them. I'll give liberals this. Liberals have substance. Problem is, socialism and doesn't work, right? So big government ain't going to work. Why is big government not going to work? Because you're dealing with institutions that can change every 2 to 4 years. They don't have any motivation to change. And if I'm dealing with Coca-Cola, if I'm dealing with corporations, as much as bad as people say corporations are, and when a corporation is successful, it lasts hundreds of years. Let's say 30, 40 years. Let's not go big, but let's say 30, 40 years, 20 years, a successful corporation. When you last that long, guess what? It's easier to make you change, especially when you make sure the competition is stiff and there's other corporations who could take your place. When the government's the only entity on the planet, let's say in that country per se, there's not as much motivation for them to change. So you see the Democrats. Do the Democrats really like Black Lives Matter? Hell no. Do the Democrats think they need African Americans to vote? Yeah, so they would tolerate them. But they don't like Black Lives Matter. They're disgusted by them. So what does that mean? That means that when you continue to vote for people like that, you're going to be in the same situation. You could make the argument even in a worse situation. You could actually make the argument. I know people might like it. If I had to vote if it was just between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, I would actually vote for Donald Trump quicker than Hillary Clinton. As bad, as crazy that sounds. Now, of course, I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump. I'm going to vote for Gary Johnson. But what I'm saying is that when we look at things, the media focuses on our emotions. So the first thing, for me, good example, do I think Donald Trump is racist? I mean, he's not, for his age, he's 70 years old. I mean, he's probably going to have tendencies that I would deem racist. But do I think he's as racist as he's being portrayed? No. But this is what's even worse. He's not as racist as he's being portrayed, but he, for attention, to get votes, to get attention, would fuel racists that he knows he's fueling them, and he would do it anyway. So to me, that's actually more dangerous than if he was racist. That means he's an opportunist who would use racial politics to further his agenda. A person like that is actually worse than an actual racist. An actual racist could be ignorant. You could school him. It may not work, but you could try. When a person is an opportunist, you can't help. You can't school that person. In fact, not only can you not school that person, you can't trust what that person has to say. So, at the end of the day, the difference is that I don't really take Donald Trump seriously. That's the difference. Like, Donald Trump knows he's not going to win the presidency. And Donald Trump, if I was a Republican, I would be more concerned about what does it mean that Donald Trump's your candidate. Because at the end of the day, this is why I would actually say libertarians have a much easier time of rising to power than the Green Party do. Because I think the Republicans are beginning to see that the party is broken. I don't think the Democrats see that yet. If you would have had it where the Democrats, where the Republicans, we found out from memos that the Republican, the RNC was trying to stop a popular candidate, right? Like how the Democrats were trying to stop Bernie, and they made sure that Hillary wins. Democrats and progressives would be non-stop all over the place talking about corruption, the Republican corruption. That didn't happen on the Republican side. It happened on the Democratic side. And guess what? Democrats were like, okay, that's cool. Because at the end of the day, you can spin it all you want to spin it. But if you look at history, you can make conspiracy theories about corporations. People can make conspiracy theories about how corporations are the boogeyman. When you look at the people who have done the worst crimes in history, it's always been governments. Always been governments. You might not have a corporation if you look deep, but when you could look it up factually, no conspiracy, evidence that we all know, it's always been governments who've done the worst crimes. So Even if you're that's my thing with the Green Party. I actually think the Green Party actually has better intentions than the Libertarian Party. If you talk about just intentions, oh, the Green Party is beautiful. That's why I respect Joe Stein. The Green Party is beautiful. Their intentions are right. They're about. They even support movements all over the world, whether it's the Palestinians, whether it could be Afro-Colombians, and in South America. They support many different movements around the world. Their intentions are right, but their ideology isn't. And though I'm a libertarian, I don't pretend that libertarianism is perfect. I don't pretend that the concept of the free market, if you make the free market fair, there's going to be some invisible hand that keeps everyone in line. No, I think that's almost borderline insane. But it's a start. That's the difference. It's a start. And even if you're not a libertarian, even if you say I'm a true progressive and I vote, you could be a communist. And I vote for, and again, I'm not, I don't think communism is not the boogeyman in me. It's not. At the end of the day, you look at Russia and China, and I can't say that I won't want to live in Russia. In China, I've been there a few times. It has a lot to grow. It still has a lot of growing to do. I'd rather live in Singapore, but I could. You give me $1 million. Put it this: you give me $2-3 million in China and $2-3 million in America, and we say which one is better to live. They're probably equal at this point. And China is communist. That's scary. So I don't look at China. America is better though if you're poor. Like America, if you're poor, middle class. I'm middle class. If you're middle class, no. America is much better. But I bring it up to say communism is not the boogeyman in me. It's not the devil in me. It's just a flawed system. And it's a flawed system because communism represents something that's supposed to be intact. Now, spiritualists would know this. When civilization is transformed. If civilization is transformed, we go through that evolution the way we're supposed to, yeah, I can see communism, socialism working. But when you have untransformed humans, the way civilization is right now, and you say you're gonna make sure the government's bigger, and the government is the one that has done most of the crimes throughout history that you can trace, not conspiracy, you could trace actual history, that's not gonna be something that works. Republicans could look at Hugo Chavez and say, Hugo Chavez was a bad guy. I got family in Venezuela. Hugo Chavez was not a bad guy. Would I want to live in Venezuela? No, I got cousins running from Venezuela, right? Because it doesn't matter your intentions. At this point, socialism by itself would always lead to what we're seeing in Latin America, like Brazil right now. As much as people talk about the Brazilian Olympics, Brazil 5-6 years ago wasn't this bad. But that happens under socialist systems. But I am not. The difference between me and regular conservatives is that regular conservatives try to ignore this argument socialist systems make. No, it's important to care about the homeless. It's important not only to speak about racism, but to change the systematic racism going on. You can't ignore that shit. And they ignored stuff. So that's why I can't lie. I don't really try to convince anyone to be libertarian because I understand that libertarians and conservatives still have some work to do. No question. Right? I just understand that when I think about it long term, it's still the systems, at least until someone makes an alternative, right? That is the most effective. But regardless of all that, I'll make this video about Jill Stein and Gary Johnson because I think in general, if you are a Bernie Sanders supporter, and you say, I like Bernie, I'm pissed off, Jill Stein is the person. If you're a Donald Trump guy and you really believe Donald Trump is what he's saying, and you don't really believe Donald Trump is that bad, well, Donald Trump is a reality star. He's not going to be serious about what he's saying. So you need to take a look at Gary Johnson. And I especially bring this up because even if you plan to vote for Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump and you don't like them, because these are the two candidates that are the most hated candidates ever running against each other, at least know the name Gary Johnson and Jill Stein. At least if you take a poll, say that you're going to vote for them just to get them to the debate. Because I do think long term, and this is my only problem with both the Libertarians and the Green Party, forget about just looking at the presidential election. They got to do a better job getting in locally, making sure. Like I give the Tea Party that. The Tea Party, when they had power, they were winning local elections. And you had really more congressmen who were Tea Party, right? Represent the Tea Party. Like the Green Party needs to do that. The presidential, candidacy, it's probably not realistic for them at this point. But locally, they can do a good job and maybe get some seats. And the sad part is this whole system is so corrupt that it's even hard for people to run locally under the Green Party or libertarians in certain states. In certain states, you can only run as Democrat and Republican. So that's why, even as a libertarian, I'll support the Green Party movement, at least for that, because both parties need to work together to crack that this two-dimensional kind of like, propaganda that we going on right now, where these two parties, you can't crack that. They could lock out anyone else from coming in and kind of bringing balance to this country's policies. So, you never heard the name Jill Stein, Gary Johnson? Check them out for sure. Cyrus King. Till next time, peace.